What are your best achievements, top 3 achievements in the last 3 years?
43% carbon emission reduction being a floor, not a ceiling in the Climate Change Act. That was an amendment that I put in. A whole range of gender equality measures that I've put into legislation, into the Fair Work Act, so gender equality is now in the objects of that act. The National Reconstruction Fund, women have to be considered when government funding is allocated. Jobs and Skills Australia, women have to be considered when we're building our skills base. Restoration of the single parent payment. This was something I went out really hard on in the public arena to say the government should lift the payment for largely women who have children up to age 14. Job done, now legislated. Lots more work to do.
You seem to have done a lot of stuff for women, is that right?
Sure, and gender equality was one of my central issues at the last campaign.
What is a woman, though? Can you define it?
I think we're done.
Of Yemini for Rebel News in Brighton. Behind me, the pre-polling for the electorate of Goldstein, and we can see here today, Zoe Daniels, the independent Till, is here today. Let's go have a chat with her. How you doing, Zoe?
How are you?
How's the campaign going?
Pretty good, thank you. I've got all these amazing people with me. This is my son, my dad,
Jeez, the
my
whole family.
friends. Hello. Got about 1,200 volunteers out, and they're all awesome. I love
How do you feel this year?
I feel really positive. I feel really energised because, it's a community-based campaign and we've got good vibes and lots of lovely people coming through to vote early too. So
I do notice there's a lot of Jews that are coming here that say that they did. I got a brother that actually voted for you last time, says that he and all his friends voted for you. He's a bit left-leaning. He says this time, no way. Do you find that this year a lot of the Jewish communities kind of turned their backs on you?
Look, I think that my humanitarian position is that Israel has a right to self-defence, but has to operate within international humanitarian law, and also that humanitarian aid needs to be delivered to Gaza. That's been my position. Some people in the Jewish community, some of whom volunteer on my campaign, agree with that. Some don't. That's their right. That's my position. I've been pretty clear about it, and that's my stance.
Do you still think that Jewish money has some sort of control over American, like Trump now? I know you said it in 2016, I reckon it was.
No, that's also not right.
What did you say?
I didn't say anything about it it was actually when the Americans decided to move the embassy under the first Trump administration. There was a lot of coverage within the United States media at that time around whether Donald Trump was being influenced by particular donors, and that was something I referenced in my own coverage, which was referenced in a widespread way across US media coverage at the time. So it was simply a question that was being raised in the public arena in the States.
So just asking questions. So that's the problem now. We see a lot of people covering their anti-Semitism is they're going, I'm just asking questions. One of the questions that people are just asking is about the money behind people like Donald Trump, which is exactly what you say you did then.
No,
do you regret?
What I said was that it was being referenced a lot in the US media at that time. So
you didn't question it?
No, it was just a question that was being asked within the US context.
But you questioned it. Did you question it or not? I don't understand. Did you question it or not?
That's something that has been well litigated. It was 10 years ago, so I don't have anything more to say about it.
Sure, but obviously in this community, this is a new election. There's a lot of people who did vote for you who look at things like that differently now in a new light since October 7.
It was something that was litigated at the last election. It's now 2025. People are free to vote as they wish, but people in the Jewish community in the electorate should know that I'm very supportive of them, and I will continue to be. And particularly in my work on anti-Semitism with whoever is in government, I will continue to do that. It's critically important. People should be able to feel safe in our community. I feel really strongly about that, and I have a lot of Jewish volunteers who work on my campaign who know that my heart is very much in that work, and I'll continue to do it.
Sure, but obviously there's a big chunk of the Jewish community that think that you're not actually standing up for the Jewish community. Why do you think that is?
Well, I don't know. I mean, it's a very emotive time for people. People are frightened and anxious. And I really feel for those people, and I'm doing my very best to represent them, and I'll continue to do that after the election should I be re-elected.
Do you think you've advocated for the hostages or for Israel's side enough since October 7? Have you done enough with regards to your foreign policy? Do you think you've done enough to stand up for our ally and for the hostages that are still held in captivity?
Well, I'm not the foreign minister, and I think that what I've done is to hold a humanitarian position for both sides.
Why did you want to keep funding UNRWA when they had terrorists in their ranks on October 7?
So obviously aid funding shouldn't be funding terrorism. That's pretty clear cut. And as you know, there was an investigation, and there is a view that those people have been weeded out. But UNRWA is an organisation that employs, I think it's about 13,000 people, and the investigation led to it was about a dozen people being removed from the organisation. Now, I'm sure you're about to say there's probably more, or that's imperfect, and that may be the case. But at the end of the day, I was in a position to advocate for humanitarian aid to go into Gaza at a time where it wasn't entering Gaza.
If there was a chance it was going to terrorism, should we not stop it?
Well, so there was an investigation, and the findings were that a particular number of people were involved, and those people were removed from the organisation, and additional safeguards were put in place to ensure that was not happening.
What was the safeguards?
Well, those safeguards were put in place by the UN, so additional monitoring.
The same UN that allowed that to happen. For years, people have been talking about the terrorism in UNRWA. Okay. The UN, time and time again, claimed that they were doing things to stop it. They were putting in safeguards, and then they got caught out on October 7. That's all that happened. All you got to go is to a Palestinian school and see what the UNRWA schools are teaching, and you know that it's not just 12 terrorists in their ranks. It's widespread. So I guess not just as the local electorate voters, but Australians in general wouldn't want taxpayer dollars going to that.
Of course they don't. But you're making some big statements there, and I know that there have been issues around education. I think, though, that another way of looking at it is that if it wasn't provided by them, Hamas would be providing the education.
Sure, but we would not be funding it as a taxpayer.
It's imperfect, but I think that there needs to be appropriate oversight to make sure that inappropriate materials are not being used.
Why didn't you attach that to our taxpayer dollars? Why don't you make that as your stance, at least minimum?
I think I've answered the question.
No, you have.
I appreciate it. You have a different view. I have a view. I've talked about it a lot. That's my view.
On a different issue, climate change is a big thing on the Teal's agenda. Independence, whatever you want to call yourselves. Mm-hmm. But it seems like the carbon footprint of the Teals in this election is far higher than both.
Seriously?
The Labor Party.
Have you seen the number of Liberal Party signs here?
All the clothing.
Ones are the Liberals, just in case you didn't know.
Sure, but they're not running on a climate agenda. You are. They're running opposed to that.
We will recycle all of our materials. We did that at the last election.
What about the big diesel trucks you got driving around with your signs?
We've only used one quite minimally during the campaign, and it is carbon offset, so it's attached to an offset scheme, but we've used it quite minimally during this campaign.
So what's the offset scheme? Do you know what you're doing to offset that?
So the company that runs the trucks buys offsets to offset its carbon emissions.
If you really believe in the climate agenda like you guys preach, why don't you actually practice what you're preaching? Why don't you lead by example and run your campaign at net zero? Why do you need the truck? Why do you need the signs? Why don't you do what you... Trumpets are patriots. That Clive Palmer seems to be doing a more green campaign with online. Why can't you do the same?
Well, we're doing our best. And I take your point. Thank you for making it. Yep.
What's the most important issue in this electorate, do you think?
Like the rest of the country, cost of living is a really critically important issue, but also the economy generally. I think there's a lot of concern in the community about international instability. That factors into your questions around Gaza as well, but also Trump and the global economy, trade wars, how that potentially affects us. Our surveys show that climate is still in the top 3 issues in this community.
So when it comes to Trump, what do you think we're doing? Are we doing it right? Is Australia handling him well? It looks like it's probably going to cost Dutton the election, whether it's what Trump's doing or the way he's reacted to it, a bit like Canada.
Yeah.
What do you think we should be doing?
So, it's very delicate. Just watch the cue there, Harvey.
I'm trying to give you space.
Yeah, no worries. Sorry. I think Trump. Everyone would love to have an easy answer of how do you deal with Trump. I think it's very delicate because from my experience of him when I was a correspondent, observing him really closely, is that he's there's 2 key things. One, he's very transactional, and the second one is that he responds to strength. He gravitates to strength. But then at the same time, if you sort of push him too hard, then he's going to potentially sort of bounce back at you with retribution. And when we've got sort of a degree of economic reliance on the US, that's quite a fine balance. I think that it's a relationship that needs to be built with him. I think during the last administration, one thing that, for whatever reason, worked effectively was that Joe Hockey managed to find a way into Trump on the golf course. And so there was a direct line to the president because he, you can talk to his staff, but at the end of the day, he's the guy, right?
Do you think Rudd is a mistake for us at the moment there then?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I think it's a legitimate question because Kevin Rudd is a brilliant man. Very good knowledge of the US, very good knowledge of China, speaks Mandarin. Does he have the right personality to deal with Trump? I think that's it's an open question because you have to be able to have that relationship with Trump, and they didn't start sort of on the right footing because of historical comments that Kevin had made. But I have an open mind about it, actually, about whether he can do the job effectively, and I think we just need to step that through and see how it evolves. Do
you think Dutton would be you want a stronger leader? Do you not think that most people think Dutton would be a stronger leader to deal with Trump?
Well, look, I don't know. I mean, I guess depending who's there, they'll have to find their way to deal with him. If it's Albanese or if it's Dutton. You
used to work for the ABC, the Liberal Party, calling it a hate media outlet. What's your reaction to that? Do you agree?
No, I don't.
Do you agree it's biased?
No, I don't. I mean, I worked there for a long time, and I was never, pressured to report in a particular way or anything like that.
That's not necessarily what bias means. It could mean that you just fit the bias box. You're left-leaning, so
I'm in the centre, actually. I really do believe that I sit in the centre of the political spectrum.
Do you know Kim Williams?
Yeah.
He's actually my uncle, but that's besides the point. He, there seems to be in the ABC a kind of push against him. Do you think that's warranted?
Well, I think that I've seen the coverage over the last week about, whatever happened about, intervening to get someone spots on radio shows and stuff. On the face of it, doesn't look great. So that if that happened, that's a bit of an error of judgment. That said,
he's my uncle and I can't get on the ABC,
but I don't know what happened. So I don't actually. I'm only reading what I've read in the paper. I think he's a very smart man. Actually, I've met with him a couple of times. I think it's good to have fresh thinking. I've seen him pounding the hallways in Canberra. I think ABC needs a really strong advocate, and from my observation of what he's doing, I think that's really good. I think ABC's failed to do that for itself, to advocate for itself a lot in the past, and I actually think it's great to have someone in there fighting for them, which is what he seems to be doing. So, again, he'll do his job and hopefully he can execute it well, and I'd like to see funding for the ABC restored.
Why should the ABC be restored? Why shouldn't it work like any commercial media outlet?
Well, it's not a commercial media outlet.
But why shouldn't it be?
Funded broadcaster.
But why shouldn't it be? Why should I be forced as a taxpayer to pay for what I believe is a biased news network when others have to we are commercially viable?
So you and I just have really different views on this. And I think, firstly, Australia has a very narrow media market, a very concentrated media market, one of the most concentrated in the world. And I think it's a really positive thing to have publicly funded broadcasters, ABC and SBS.
Why?
Because you have publicly funded independent journalism that is not influenced by who is paying for the advertising.
But then when it becomes
it's a different model. You don't like it. I do.
I don't like it because I think it's biased. I'll tell you why. Like in the election, the lead up to the election, for example, they platformed people like Fatima Payman over and over again, but then on the right, they didn't give those other independent right-wing people, like even, no matter how you feel about them, Gerard Rennick and all these other ones that are also running, they didn't get platformed on the ABC at all.
Well, I don't know. I mean, when I was there, we had to count virtually the seconds of every candidate, so I'd be surprised if it's as blatant as that. But
they didn't get on. She's been on several times.
But what they do is that they have to balance those numbers across the campaign. So the thing is, I mean, I find it fascinating that people like to ask me about every flaw, cost-benefit analysis of the ABC. I worked there. I don't work there anymore. I'm not the Minister for Communications. I am a fan of publicly funded independent broadcasters. I like NPR in the US as well. It's a different model, but I think it's also effective.
They're all left-wing outlets, though. Is that your bias?
No, I don't think. I don't think, for example, there is some coverage on the ABC that drives me mad, and I feel like throwing things at the
like
radio.
What?
I don't know, just bad reporting, sort of.
On what? Like on just general day-to-day reporting, or about?
Yeah, but like unrigorous reporting, stuff like that. But when I watch Four Corners or Australian Story or Foreign Correspondent, I think those programs are fantastic, and they're so rare. Like internationally now, there's barely anything like that, and I think that's really special. I think it should be protected, and so that's my view.
But why does public funding need to protect that if it's so great?
Because even if you look at the commercial TVs and the newspapers now here, they barely have any kind of in-depth stuff because it doesn't really stack up. It's not profitable. It's expensive. It's expensive to do, and it's not profitable.
But overall, you think it is unbiased?
I actually don't watch that much of it anymore because I'm too busy.
Are you like me? You only watch your own shows?
Well, I only watch, I'll watch Four Corners if there's something on it that's good, or Foreign Correspondent. And I listen to ABC radio, I must say, more than I watch TV because, like most people, I watch TV on demand now.
If you enjoyed this discussion with the independent for Goldstein, Zoe Daniels, make sure to like, comment, but most importantly share it far and wide, because she works for the ABC and they're certainly not going to ask her the questions I did. So it's up to you guys to share it far and wide. And then head over to exposetherot.com. Check out all of our stories and reports exposing the rot in this election. And if you support our mission, please consider chipping in to help us cover the costs of this campaign. exposetherot.com. We cannot do it without you.